Hi there, I'm Todd Miller, 7-8 culinary arts teacher with Lakehead Public Schools. I've got another recipe for you to try today, but before we start, a few reminders. First off, if you're unsure about any of the equipment that you're going to be using, make sure you ask someone that has some more kitchen experience, especially when you're working around the stove, oven, and even the microwave. Make sure you understand how they work, and always have a pair of oven mitts handy, even for the microwave. Some of the equipment gets hot in there. If the recipe calls for the use of a knife, make sure that you're really comfortable using a sharp knife like this. Again, ask somebody that has some experience and practice first before using it for your recipe. Always hold the knife with a lot of conviction in one hand, and with your other hand, you want to make sure that you keep your hand in that claw position, kind of like you're holding a tennis ball. Always keep your hand curled back so that the knife doesn't come in contact with your fingertips. Before you start the recipe, make sure you watch the entire video, read the recipe entirely through, make sure you understand everything, and of course, get all of your equipment and your ingredients out first. It makes the recipe go a lot more smoothly. And finally, don't forget, you made the mess, you're in charge of cleaning up. Don't leave a dirty kitchen for someone else. So have a great time cooking. We're going to start off today with some muffins. We're making muffins, a very basic recipe first. We call it a master recipe because for two reasons. First one is it's a great recipe for just getting started. Once you get comfortable making this muffin recipe, you can make pretty much any muffin recipe. The other reason we call it a master recipe is because you can take this recipe and just change it up with a couple of ingredients here or there to make a whole different variety of muffins. And we're actually going to make 4 different kinds of muffins today. I'm going to show you 2 and then show you the final product with 4 different ones. So, got all of our ingredients in front of us here. Got a couple of bowls. When we're baking, we usually need 2 bowls, one for our dry ingredients and another one for our wet ingredients. So we're going to start off with our dry ingredients today. And we need a total of 2 cups of flour. So when I'm measuring my flour, I'm using a ½ cup for this because it fits in nicely. And as I'm measuring it, I'm gently scooping in more flour than I need and then scraping off the extra so I get exactly the amount I want. In the recipes that I'm giving you the ingredients in imperial form, which is like cups, teaspoons, things like that. Also metric form, that's like milliliters. And finally, I'm also giving to you some of the ingredients I'm giving to you in weight or grams. And we do that because that's how you get the most accurate measurement. So I've got 2 cups of flour in here, which is about 500 milliliters, and which is the same as 300 grams. We're going to measure with the imperial today for the rest of it, but the instructions are given in all 3. Couple more things for my dry ingredients. I need some baking powder. There's a big difference between baking powder and baking soda, so make sure they look a lot the same and they sound the same, but make sure you're using the right one. And I need 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And again, trying to make it nice and level. And need ½ a teaspoon of salt. A little bit of salt when we're baking usually, and that just brings out the flavor of the other ingredients. Now I'm going to whisk those ingredients up. I'm using a whisk for that because it's a nice easy way to incorporate the baking powder and the salt in the flour so you don't get one big clump of baking powder. But I'm only going to use the whisk for the dry ingredients because we're going to have a really thick batter, and if we try to use the whisk at that, we just end up with a whole bunch of the batter inside the whisk, and that wouldn't be very helpful. So I'm going to put that right out of the way now so I don't accidentally use it again. Then I'll switch to my wet ingredients. I'm going to start off with 2 eggs. And I start with the eggs because I want to break them up a little bit first. So right now we can see the yolks in there really easily, and we don't want that. We want to just use the back of a spatula or a fork, wooden spoon, anything you can find that will just break these up a little bit. Just enough so that we can mix the whites and the yolks together. Now the next ingredient is a bit of a weird one. It's sugar. We need sugar in our muffins, will make them taste great. Sugar is a dry ingredient, so we're using baking scoops to measure our dry ingredients. However, sugar is one that we usually mix in with our wet ingredients. So I'm going to use the same technique I used first with the flour to scrape off the extra. We're using 2/3 of a cup. Scrape off the extra again. But I'm mixing it with my wet ingredients because we want that sugar to dissolve. And just after a few seconds of mixing, scraping it with the spatula, we can see all the sugar dissolves right into the eggs. Now we need some fat. to make them taste great. You can use vegetable oil, you can use butter. Some people do substitute things like applesauce, so if they want them a little healthier. We're going to go with the butter today. And I've got some melted butter that we're using, and we need 1/3 of a cup. And you can just melt that in the microwave, probably for about 30 or 40 seconds. We'll melt it enough so that it mixes in well. And then finally we need some milk as well. We're using 1 cup of milk. So we'll add that in with our wet ingredients and just give that a gentle stir to stir it all up. That's it. That's the basic recipe. Now we want to ready to put our wet ingredients into our dry ingredient bowl, or vice versa. You can go either way, but we'll make a small well here by pushing some of the flour out of the way so that when we pour in our wet ingredients, we get a maximum wet touching all the dries. Use my spatula to make sure we scrape everything out. And now this is the trick with muffins. So far this has been pretty easy, and this part's easy too, but the important thing is to use nice, good folding technique, scraping the bottom of the bowl, and we're just going to mix it enough so that we don't see any bits of flour anymore. If you're making something like a cake, you would probably use a hand mixer or a stand mixer, something that would allow you to really mix it up well so the batter is nice and smooth. With muffins, you do not want the batter to be smooth. You want to see some lumps in it. If you mix it too much, you're doing something, you're working the gluten, is the fancy term for it, and that's going to give you muffins that look and taste a bit like hockey pucks. So we just want to mix enough. I don't see flour anymore, still have lots of clumps in there, and that's okay. So there we go. That's our basic recipe. We would put those in our muffin tins, and then we would bake them in the oven. We're going to do something a little bit different now, though. We're going to make 2 different varieties of muffins using this basic recipe. So this basic recipe, you can cook this up. It tastes absolutely great, especially with some jam or Nutella or something like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to divide this in half, and I'm going to make 2 different kinds. First off, chocolate chip muffins. So just adding about half a cup of chocolate chips will transform the taste of the muffins. So I'll pour those in there. And again, just a bit of a stir. We don't want to over stir it, so just enough to mix those chocolate chips in. Anything that you're adding near the end, like chocolate chips or nuts or fruit, you want to add right at the end and just give it enough of a stir to mix it in. It's just so it's blended well. With our other half, we're going to make some fruit muffins. In this case, we're going to use blueberries. You can use fresh fruit or you can use frozen fruit. If you use frozen, and I've used frozen today because it's easier to buy at the store and it's usually cheaper, I'm going to not thaw it. Put them in frozen, and that'll keep your muffins from turning purple. And again, just mixing it enough so that every muffin gets some blueberries in it. That's it. So now we're going to put that on our muffin tin. You can use those little paper cups if you want, but that adds a bit of a garbage to our world. So I just like to grease the tins. Even though it's non-stick pan, it's good to grease them so they come out easily. You can use some butter. You can use a little bit of oil on a brush, or you can just use some cooking spray like I use. You want to hold the cooking spray about 30 centimeters, which is about the length of a ruler you'd have in your classroom, about 30 centimeters away from your muffin tin, and just a light spray back and forth like that. You don't have to put too much in each one of them. And then we just want to put our muffin batter into our tin. I'm using 2 spoons, because if I just use 1 spoon, it would be very difficult to get all of the batter off. See, there's some batter on there, there's a chocolate chip as well, and some people might tend to then want to use their finger to get the rest of the batter off. If you have really clean hands, that's okay for the first one, but then once you go to do your second one, you're probably going to use that same finger, and in between, I bet you probably will have licked your finger, and that would be really gross. But if we used 2 spoons, we can use 1 to scoop them up, and we can use the other one to put the batter in. And sometimes you're going to get a little batter on top of your muffin tin. That's okay, because you sprayed the whole thing anyways. It's just you want as much as possible to get them all into your muffin tins, because then there's more for you to eat. What a lot of people are doing these days too is they're not using spoons like this, but they're using ice cream scoops. So ice cream scoops are now really popular for making muffins and cookies and things like that. It's got to be the kind of ice cream scoop that has a little lever on the side, because that way it'll release all of your batter into your muffins. And the nice thing about that is that you get the exact same amount in each muffin cup, so that your muffins cook exactly the same. So I got my 6 chocolate chip on that side, and on the other side I'm going to do my blueberries. Blueberries are already starting to thaw a bit, so it's turning my batter a little bit purple. So I want to work rather quickly here. It's okay if my muffins are a little bit purple, but I don't want them to be completely purple. Now these are going to go into an oven, 375 degrees. Some recipes call for 300, other ones call for 400, so I go down the middle and use 375. And I want to make sure that my oven is preheated first, so it's already been on for a little while. And that way, when I put it in, it's already at that temperature. Some things when you're cooking, it's not a big deal if the oven isn't right at the temperature yet, but when you're baking, making things like bread doughs and muffins and cookies and cakes, you want to make sure that your oven is right at the temperature you want it to be. Lots of different muffin recipes say you have to cook your muffins anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes, depending on it. So I always set a timer for 17 minutes, sort of halfway through, and then we're going to test our muffins. And of course, many of you know to test a muffin, just need a toothpick. So we'll stick these in our 375 degree oven. We're going to let them cook for a little while, and then we'll come back and see what they look like. So I set the timer for 17 minutes, and at the end of 17 minutes, I took my toothpick, stuck them in a few of the muffins, and there was a little bit of wet batter on it still, so we don't want any wet batter on it, so I put them back in for another 2 more minutes, tested them with the toothpick again, and this time the toothpick came out really clear. Every oven is different. Once you get to know your own oven, you'll know what kind of temperature and how much time you can put it in, but it turned out today we needed 19 minutes instead of 17. So I let them cool in the pan for about 5 minutes first. And then once they cooled down a little bit, I use very carefully a knife to run around the edges. I don't want to scratch my pan, so I do that very carefully, and then use the knife to gently take it out. They need to go up on a cooling rack. Should be on the cooling rack for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then they're ready to eat. Muffins are actually best eaten fresh, so if you can keep them around the house for less than a day, that's actually a good thing because you do want to eat them as fresh as you can. So here's the different muffins that I made today, plus a couple of extra suggestions. So we start off with our basic recipe, which we added some chocolate chips into them, or you can add some fruit, in this case blueberries, into them. You can add raspberries as well, or rhubarb, or other things like that. So 2 different kinds. And then you can, like I said, you can take the recipe and you can change it up a little bit. So I have some banana muffins here. All I did was not use the milk, and instead I used some mashed up bananas. Instead of regular white sugar, I used brown sugar instead. And over here I got some double chocolate muffins. This kind here, all I did was put some chocolate chips inside the muffins. In this case, I also used something called cocoa powder. So it's like a flour as well. It's the same consistency as flour. So I took out a little bit of the flour and added in cocoa powder instead, and chocolate chips as well. So you end up with a double chocolate chip muffin. But you can also use things like apples. You can use different types of nuts. You can make bran muffins with raisins in them. You can use lemon zest and poppy seed. There's all sorts of different recipes out there. But once you've got this basic recipe down, you'll be good to go with all sorts of different add-ins, and then changing the recipe up a bit to make the kind of muffins that you're going to want to eat at home. So happy cooking and good luck.